Hello, gorgeous souls. Today we are going to tackle a topic that's been brewing in my DMs for a long time. And it's something that comes up often in random conversations with strangers. It's also something that people email me about. And that is how to stay interested in sex when your body is changing. Now, before we dive in, let me say this. If you are feeling a little uncomfortable about today's topic, that's okay. We are going to talk about sex, desire, and changing bodies. So it might get a little bit squirmy, but I won't promise. I will tell you what my intention is. My hope for this episode is that you will feel empowered and ready to reclaim your pleasure and renegotiate your relationship with your body if this is something that you are struggling with. So I'm going to just begin with a little story, a personal story. I have been aware that I was a sexual being for as long as I can remember. And I'm talking long before I had sexual experiences with another person. I was already having lots of me sex, if you know what I mean. I mean, even, gosh, I can remember like being aware of my genitals when I was very young and actively engaging in what I now know to be masturbation as early as, 8 or something. So I was aware of my sexuality for a really long time and as a younger person. And my turn on, like once I actually, became sexually active with other people, my turn on was so easily accessible. I mean, the wind could blow and I'd be ready. Until one day, that wasn't the case. And thankfully, that did not come as a shock to me. But that was only because I was familiar with sexuality and familiar with the concept of the shift for that I'd seen it happen to so many other people. But for a lot of people, and I'll just frame this for women, that shift can be really jarring. Not too long ago, one of my clients told me that she feels betrayed by her body. And she said, and I'll quote, "I feel like a rusty old car that needs a jump start," right? And what she and I have both experienced, for me, the switch was from spontaneous to responsive. So responsive arousal is arousal that builds in response to stimulation. It's like the lights don't come on until you flip the switch. Like spontaneous arousal is more like a motion sensor light, like, oh, the sun moved. Whereas responsive arousal is more like you have to manually turn the switch on. Does that make sense? So how do you work with that though? Like how do you work with responsive arousal? I think that the first step is really acceptance, which that's the first step to most things, right? Is just accepting. And by that, I just mean letting go of the idea that your body should be behaving differently, which is not the easiest thing in the world because it's so easy to make up a story about your body being broken or that it needs fixing when what's really going on is it's just a season change. Think about it like this. Your body is responding to touch, sensation, and ambiance, and you get a chance to savor the experience from a place of presence. Have you ever had like a decadent piece of chocolate and it tastes so good that you just want to take your time? Well, responsive arousal can be like that. It can be like that. That being said, you might need to adjust your approach to accommodate this new state of being. In other words, you want to give yourself plenty of time to warm up. And for the record, a woman's body, even when she's in a different season, a woman's body can take 15 minutes or more to become fully aroused. And let me tell you, full arousal is muy importante at any age. But let me explain what full arousal means. Have you ever been turned on to the point where you actually ache, like your pussy aches? Not in a it hurts, it's painful kind of way, but in a it feels like everything is so swollen that you just need to do something, right? That's full arousal. And what that really means is that you have maximum blood flow to all of your parts down there. And the reason that that's important, and it's important at any age, but it's particularly important in midlife because, not only does your hormones and stuff shift, but what also happens is because of the result of the shifting hormonal changes and all the other things that are occurring in your body in this season, the tissue is different. So you want to make sure that you are fully aroused because that actually will minimize the possibility of tearing or damage to the tissue. Look, we're all friends here, so I'm just going to be really real. I know that even in your younger spontaneous arousal years, that there were probably times when you weren't all the way ready to start and started anyway, and you might have created like little micro tears in the tissue. And so sometimes that burning sensation when you pee afterwards is the result of little tiny tears in the tissue. And the tissue of the vulva and the vagina is very similar to the tissue in the mouth, same kind of epithelial material. So the recovery time can be very swift. Like it's like you bite your cheek and the next day you feel it, but by the end of the next day, you're probably fully recovered most of the time. Well, the same can be true in vaginal and vulva tissue. However, as you get older, those little fissures are more likely to occur because the tissue is a little bit thinner. So with that in mind, full arousal, again, when there is maximum blood flow, everything down there kind of gets cushiony, like pillowy. So the blood flow and the engorged tissue actually makes it a lot more pliable. It means that it just isn't as easy to damage. So full arousal is important from that very practical lens, but it's also important because if we're talking about arousal and getting it on, don't you want to have the maximum experience? So that might mean that you need to extend the foreplay. So if you need to extend the foreplay, extend the foreplay. Now, I know I hadn't intended to get so physiologically technical, but I feel like, I want to paint a clear picture for you. And I know sometimes it might feel like we're playing this never-ending game of whack-a-mole with our insecurities because one day it's wrinkles. Like there's that, I remember when I first got this little wrinkle underneath my chin, I would see it sometimes and sometimes I wouldn't. So it's like I would see it and then I tried to like find it and it wouldn't occur. And then one day it was just there regularly. And I had to get used to that. And then sometimes it's the extra pounds that seem to take up permanent residence. And if we're lucky, the residence is in places that we like, right? One day it seemed like my ass just got bigger. And I was like, oh, my inheritance came in. I was really proud of this new ass. Well, then I didn't feel like that when I started to gain some weight in my midsection though, right? So sometimes the places that the extra pounds take up residence is in places we don't like. But here's the thing. Every line, every curve, every silver hair tells a story. And it's the story of a well-lived life, a life that is rich with laughter, tears, and adventures. And let me tell you, there is nothing sexier than a woman who can own her experience and just fully embody who she is, right? You'd have seen those women where it's like their spine seems extra straight when really it's not posture you're seeing. What you're seeing is self-acceptance. It's just them accepting where they are and who they are right now. And we all can do that. We all can have that. So I want you to try something for me tonight. This is an invitation, not a requirement, but I invite you. I invite you to stand in front of the mirror and really look at yourself. Do it in the nude. Just stand everything out in front of the mirror and look at yourself. Not to judge, not to pick apart, but to marvel, to marvel. Touch your skin, appreciate the softness, the strength, the resilience of your body. This body that has carried you through so many things. It has shown up for you even when you couldn't show up for yourself. This body that has stayed steadfast and loyal to you, no matter where you were or what you were going through or what was happening, it has been here for you. And that deserves some appreciation, right? Your body, love it, appreciate it. Now, just so you know, it doesn't mean that you have to be happy about every single part. But what you can do is be grateful for the parts. Like I've got these arms. I've been having a few conversations recently about body acceptance, and I've never loved my arms. They've always been a little fluffy. Even as a child, thankfully, my mother made most of my clothes, and so she sometimes would have to adjust the arms to accommodate. And even at this big old age, I still sometimes buy things that, if I bought them to fit my arms, it's too big in the middle. But if I buy it to fit my torso, sometimes the arms are too snug. So my mother is still adjusting my armholes, right? But so I'm not thrilled about these arms. I would love to just have the kind of arms that fit in the clothes that I like. But just because they're not designed how I would prefer, I am so grateful for these arms. They do so much for me. They allow me to do so many things. So anyways, that's a little bit of an aside, but I just want to invite you to just show some love and appreciation. And speaking of appreciation, let's get back on the topic at hand. When was the last time you had a real honest to goodness conversation with your current partner or a previous partner about what lights your fire? And I'm not talking about like hinting and hoping that they'll figure out what you're talking about. I mean, laying it all out there. Now, some of y'all are squirming in your seats right now because talking about sex can feel awkward. So that's normal, but it's worth it, because here's the secret. People who talk openly about sex with each other have better sex. It's not rocket science. People who openly share what they like, what feels good, what they desire, what they would like to explore, what could feel a little bit better, what doesn't feel good, like just talking about their experience. People who do that have more fulfilling sex lives. True story, 4 facts. And get this, because talking about it means the other person can help you have better sex, right? And the best lovers can give and follow instructions. So if the idea of talking about sex with your partner or a potential partner, if that gives you the heebies and the jeebies, I want you to try playing this game that I like to call 3 things. It's not really a game, it's more of an exercise, but 3 things. So each of you shares 3 things that you enjoy about sex. And then you share 3 things you'd like to explore. I said explore instead of change simply because telling a partner that there's something you want to change can sometimes stir up some insecurity for them. So explore. So that could mean exploring something that you already do, but doing it a little bit differently. So it could be like, oh, I really enjoy when we kiss a lot during foreplay. I really enjoy the way that you support my legs, when we're getting busy. I really enjoy being on top. And then you could say, I'd like to explore being on top, facing the other direction. I think that that might be a little bit more pleasurable for me. I'd like to see how that works, as opposed to saying, when I'm on top, it just doesn't feel good. So it's just a way to position the language so that you don't set your partner up to feel defensive or not good enough. Like, we want to make sure that our partners feel empowered, and we want that for ourselves too, right? Another variation would be sharing 3 ways you enjoy being touched and 3 things that don't feel as good. Again, you don't want to say you're doing this wrong, but, it's like, oh, I really enjoy being fingered. It doesn't feel as good when there are 3 fingers. I think I prefer 2. You see what I mean? So the only major rule to 3 things is that you listen without judgment, because by opening the door for this conversation, there's also space for your partner to share things that may not feel as good to them. They might share some things that you thought were okay that actually aren't, because maybe they haven't felt comfortable speaking up either. So by being brave enough to open the conversation, you might also help your partner to gain some courage too. And you might be completely surprised at the things you discover and how this can really enhance your sex life. Now, if you are up for diving a little bit deeper, you can try my yes, no, maybe list. And this list was inspired by the Pleasure Chest, which is a sex shop. They have several different locations, but they have one here in Los Angeles. So the yes, no, maybe list is basically a list of sexy activities. And the way it works is you go through the list and you decide if you're a yes, if you're a no, or if you are a maybe to each item. For example, you might be a yes to lap dancing, but maybe you're a no to double penetration, right? So I highly suggest that each of you and your partner, go through the list separately and then sit down and go through your answers together. And I am going to put a link to a free copy of the yes, no, maybe list in the show notes. So you can just download it and you can print it out. I highly recommend printing it out. So I will just share a story of my own experience with the yes, no, maybe list with my current partner. Before we had sex initially, we actually were seeing each other for 4 months before we did anything sexually. And we talked about sex, and he was very explicit about the fact that he was ready whenever I was. And it took me a little bit longer time to be ready, which is okay. Anyway, before we actually did anything, though, I sent him a copy of the yes, no, maybe list. And I said, I'd like you to go through this list, and I'm going to also go through the list. I'd like to sit down together and go through our list. And so one day we met for lunch, and he had picked up some sandwiches, and we sat on this bluff overlooking the ocean, and we pulled out our list and we went through each item one by one. So it's like, oh, I like, I don't know, reverse cowgirl. And it's like, oh, I'd like that too. Or slapping is like, oh, I'm not into slapping, is a no for me. And another no for me is like, oh, anal penetration is a no for me. And one of the great things about going through that list together was we actually were able to talk about, like, I was actually able to say, well, the reason I'm a hard no on anal sex is because I've been raped twice. Both times involved anal penetration. And so we got to have this very intimate conversation about why we felt the way we did about the things on the list. It's like, oh, I'm a total yes to being fingered. And then I explained, I have always loved the sensation of being touched that way, that down there. And he was able to share things, that he really enjoyed and things that he was a no on. And then there were things that we both ended up being a maybe on. And those things we circled because those were things that we were both interested in trying out together. So it ended up being this very rich conversation that actually established a level of intimacy before we even had sex. And I'll talk about what our first sexual experience was like in another episode with his permission, by the way. So I can't recommend the yes, no, maybe list enough. And again, I will drop a link so that you can download a copy in the show notes. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the elephant that might be in the room for some of us. And that is that feeling of maybe a little bit of sandpaperiness down there. So first off, I want to say this is common and that you're not broken. Vaginal dryness is common for a lot of women with age. And that, again, is the result of changing hormones. But that does not mean that you have to grin and bear it. There are solutions. There are over-the-counter lubricants. There are, prescription hormone therapies. Like there's a lot of options. And the key, just like you need to have conversations about sex with your partner, you also need to be having these conversations with your doctor. I don't know about you, but I have never had a gynecologist ask me if sex was pleasurable for me. And so sometimes the onus of that conversation is on you. So if you are having some vaginal dryness or some discomfort, talk to your doctor. Talk to your doctor. Because pleasure is important. Pleasure is your birthright, no matter how old you are. If you are still interested, and it's okay if you're not interested, but if you are still interested in having sexual experiences, then you should be able to explore that without pain. So talk to your doctor, do your research, and don't be afraid to experiment. Again, you might want to talk to your doctor before you experiment, but don't be afraid. Just really, have the conversation, open the floor for it. They're trained, and if you don't feel safe talking to your doctor, that might be a sign that you might need a new doctor because you should feel safe talking about your body with your doctor. And safe doesn't necessarily mean you won't feel awkward or uncomfortable, but you should be able to feel safe talking to them. Okay, so I want to talk, before we go, I really want to talk a little bit about rediscovering your sexual self. It's kind of like going on a date with yourself with the awareness that what turns you on now might be very different than what turns you on when you were in your 20s or your 30s. And that's not sad, that's exciting because it's a chance to explore and to play and to figure out who you are as a sexual being at this stage in your life. I mean, you might discover that you love the slow build of tantric exercises, right? You might discover that infusing your breath into sexual experiences heightens the experience for you. Or you could decide that, a new toy might be just the spice you need in your life right now. The point is, it could be anything, but the point is to stay curious and open to newness, right? So the homework for this week is to do that exercise in the mirror, but also to just take some time to check in with yourself. How are you feeling about your body? What are your desires right now? What do you want? What would you like more of? What would you like less of? And how much pleasure are you experiencing? How much would you like to experience? How good can you take it? So, having this conversation with yourself will prime you for having the conversation with your partner. And do both. Talk to you and talk to them. Because you are worthy of love and pleasure and connection at any age. At any age. Next week, we are going to talk about something else that so many women struggle with, testing positive for herpes. I'm going to get into why a positive herpes status is not the end of the world. And I'm also going to talk about what shame has to do with it. And I also am going to unpack the things that doctors and the media don't tell you. So, yeah, we're going there. We're going there. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, for showing up, for you, for this, for us. And I want to leave you with this. Love is a full body experience. Enjoy.